Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Module 3, where we've been unraveling the mysteries of cognition. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most fascinating aspects of the mind, memory. Memory isn't just about recalling facts or storing experiences, it's the very foundation of how we understand and navigate the world around us. Before we jump in, let's start with a quick review to build on what we've covered so far. How would you define G in the context of intelligence? A, the general cognitive factor that influences all cognitive abilities. B, the seventh letter of the alphabet. C, a construct related to spatial problem solving. Or D, gender differences. The answer is, of course, A. G is the general factor that influences all cognitive abilities. Here's another one. Which theory suggests that there are distinct types of intelligence, such as musical or spatial intelligence, that operate independently? A, general intelligence theory. B, multiple intelligences theory. C, emotional intelligence theory. Or D, comparative cognition. The answer here is B, Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. This theory broadens our understanding of intelligence beyond a single measure like IQ. Great work. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever forgotten something you thought you'd never forget? Or maybe you've been sure you remembered something correctly, only to realize later that you got it wrong. That's the fascinating and sometimes frustrating world of memory. Today, we'll explore the complexities of memory, how it works, why it's fallible, and what we can do to improve it. Memory is more than just a mental filing cabinet. It's a dynamic process that shapes who we are. Here's what we'll be tackling today. We'll start with the differences between recognition and recall, and how each of them can fail us in different ways. We'll talk about how memory is reconstructed rather than replayed, with some examples of how it's malleable. We'll discuss the processes and systems of memory, encoding, storage, and retrieval. We'll talk about how memory is organized. And finally, we'll bring in some practical strategies to harness the power of memory in everyday life before doing a bit of review and concluding. Here's a question. Have you ever been certain you'd recognize something, only to struggle when asked to describe it or recreate it from memory? This brings us to two key ways that we retrieve information: recognition and recall. Let's start with an activity to get us thinking. We'll begin with two quick polls. First up, I can recognize a penny, 1 cent, if I see it. Do you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? The second, I can accurately draw a penny from memory. Again, strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. Now let's test that confidence. On the screen, you'll see 9 different images of pennies. Only one of them is the real one. Can you pick it out? Take your time, make your selection. You said that you could recognize it, right? Well, let's reveal the correct answer. It's number 6. Many of us confidently say that we could recognize a penny, but when faced with such similar options, we'll second guess ourselves. Recognition is often impacted by how distinct the other options are. On the other hand, recall demands generating information without cues, like asking you to draw a penny from memory. Think about it this way. Recognition is like picking someone out of a lineup, whereas recall is like describing someone to a sketch artist. Now, sticking with this theme, there can be some troubling implications when it comes to our justice system. Take, for example, the case of David Ranta. Ranta spent 23 years in prison for a crime that he didn't commit, partly due to errors in a police lineup. Eyewitnesses were confident in their recognition, but their memories were flawed. This highlights a critical point. Memory isn't like a perfect camera recording of our past. It's prone to errors, and these errors can have life-changing consequences. As you can see, eyewitness misidentification is one of the leading causes of wrongful conviction when compared to other causes. So why do these failures happen? What are some common reasons? One, it can be due to interference. Similar details can confuse our memory. We can have problems with priming. If you remember back to lecture 3.1, contexts or suggestions can influence what we think we remember. Cognitive load can also play a role. When we're overwhelmed, our memory retrieval might become less accurate. It might also have to do with poor encoding. Sometimes memories aren't recorded very well, which can make our ability to recall things less accurate. Let's take a minute to reflect. Can you recall a time when your memory played tricks on you? How did you realize that you'd misremembered? What do you think might have caused the error? Was it interference, priming, something else? Memory is a fascinating but imperfect process, and as we'll see, it's not just prone to errors, it's also incredibly malleable. Imagine your memory as a jigsaw puzzle. It pieces together fragments of experience to create a picture of the past. But what happens when some pieces are missing, or the wrong ones are included? That's the challenge of memory. It's reconstructed, not a perfect recording. Let's test this idea with a quick activity. First, I want you to watch this viral video of a girl bravely fighting off a bear. Pay close attention to the details, because you're going to need them. All right, let's see how well you remember the scene. First question, what color was the girl's dress? Pink, black, gold, or blue? The correct answer is blue. This one may have been easy as she was the central figure in the video, but let's try one that's a little bit harder. How many bear cubs were with the adult bear? 0, 1, 2, or 3. Do you remember this one? There were 2 bear cubs with the adult bear, which you can kind of see in this screenshot. They moved around quite a bit. Let's try a harder one. How many dogs were in the yard? 5, 4, 3, or 2? This one's challenging. The dogs were running around, probably weren't paying as close attention to them, but the answer here is 4. Here I got a screenshot where you can see all 4 dogs appearing at the same time. Even if you were paying close attention, some of these details might have slipped by. Why? Well, because memory is selective and often influenced by what seems important to us at the time. This is where memory gets a bit tricky. It's not just selective, it can also change in response to cues. Let's explore a few studies that demonstrate just how easily our memories can be influenced. Have you ever been convinced of something that never happened? In a study by Wade and colleagues in 2002, researchers showed participants doctored photographs of themselves as children, like riding in a hot air balloon, something that they'd never actually done. The study took 20 participants who were between the ages of 18 and 28, so they weren't old enough to have memory problems yet. The researchers then doctored the photos and asked the participants if they remembered the events. But here's the wild part. 50% of participants reported remembering the event. Sometimes they even added their own vivid details that weren't in the photograph. The study shows how suggestion and imagery can implant entirely false memories. Another classic study is by Loftus and Palmer in 1974, and it reveals how even subtle changes in language can distort a memory. Participants watched a video of a car accident, and then they were asked to estimate the speed of the cars when different words were included in this sentence. How fast were the cars going when they contacted, bumped, hit, collided, or smashed? The wording significantly influenced their speed estimates. And it didn't stop there. Participants who heard the word smashed were more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass, even though there wasn't any in the video. These studies highlight some key points about memory. Memory is incomplete. We often think that we have access to all the details of something that we've witnessed, but this is not the case. Memory can be suggestible. Language, photos, or even casual comments can shape what we think we remember. Memory is also reconstructive. Each time we recall something, we actually alter it slightly based off of new information or what we were thinking about at the time. And memory errors can have real-world consequences. False memories can influence personal beliefs, relationships, or even legal outcomes. And now that we've seen how memory can be fallible, let's take a look at some of the underlying processes of how it works. Let's break memory down into 4 key stages: attention, encoding, storage, and retrieval. These processes work together to create, maintain, and access our memories. But if any stage falters, memory can fail. So let's explore each one. The initial phase involves attention. We need to direct our attention towards something to be able to make a memory about it. If we aren't paying attention to an event or detail, we won't be recording it in our memory. Encoding is the next step. It's how we take information in. Think of it as entering data into a computer. Without encoding, nothing gets saved. There's several different ways that we can encode information. For example, visual encoding is about processing information and spatial relationships. Acoustic encoding focuses on sound, like rhymes and rhythms. And semantic encoding makes meaning out of information, which is the most effective way to encode for long-term memory. Imagine you're trying to remember a list of groceries. If you picture the items in your fridge, that's visual encoding. If you repeat the list aloud, that's acoustic encoding. But if you group items into categories, like fruits, vegetables, and snacks, you're using semantic encoding, which is the most effective. Once information is encoded, it needs to be stored. This involves maintaining it over time, much like saving files on a computer. Memory storage happens at different levels. We have sensory memory, a brief snapshot that holds information for a fraction of a second, like seeing a flashing sign. Short-term memory, which holds small amounts of information for about 20 to 30 seconds, like remembering a phone number. And then long-term memory, which is a vast and durable storehouse where knowledge, experiences, and skills are all kept. This is where memories can last a lifetime. We'll be discussing these systems in depth shortly. Finally, retrieval is how we access stored memories. We've already discussed 2 types of retrieval: recall and recognition. So now that we've covered how memory is organized at the process level, let's take a closer look at memory storage. Memory isn't just one thing. It's an interconnected system that processes, stores, and retrieves information. But we typically divide memory into 3 systems that we saw earlier: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Let's explore how each of these systems works in greater depth. Sensory memory captures everything that comes in through your senses for a brief moment. It's like a lightning flash or a rapid snapshot. Its capacity covers our entire moment-to-moment experience of our senses, but its duration is extremely short, lasting less than a second for visual information, or iconic memory, and a few seconds for auditory information, or echoic memory. Imagine a lightning flash during a thunderstorm. You can visualize it vividly for a moment, but the image quickly fades unless you focus on it. Sensory memory helps us decide what's worth paying attention to and figures out what to send to the next stage: short-term memory. Once information grabs your attention, it moves into short-term memory, where it's held temporarily for processing. Short-term memory has a capacity that's limited to about 7 plus or minus 2 items. This is how we chunk information, and it's known as Miller's magic number. Its duration is around 20 to 30 seconds, unless you're actively rehearsing the information. We can improve short-term memory through maintenance rehearsal, by repeating information to keep it active. Think about trying to remember a new phone number. If you repeat it to yourself, you're using maintenance rehearsal. Short-term memory is like a workspace for your mind. It's where information is actively processed, and if it's deemed important, it's then transferred to long-term memory. Long-term memory has an incredible capacity and duration. Some memories last a lifetime. Its duration of memories can usually range from minutes to decades. Explicit memory is conscious, and it includes episodic memory, which is personal experiences, and semantic memory, which is facts and knowledge. Implicit memory is generally unconscious and includes procedural memory, like riding a bike, and priming, or associations. Now let's touch on what happens when these systems fail us, when we forget, or when memory is disrupted, like due to amnesia. Why do we forget things? We can forget due to decay. Information fades over time if it's not rehearsed. We can forget due to interference. Competing information disrupts recall, like studying for 2 exams back-to-back. We can forget due to insufficient priming. Retrieval cues are missing or unclear. Or disorganized encoding. Memories may not have been stored effectively or could be hard to locate. Specific patterns of memory loss or amnesia fall into 2 different categories: On the one hand, we have retrograde amnesia, which is the loss of past memories, often following trauma. The classic film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind covers this kind of amnesia. In that film, Joel, played by Jim Carrey, discovers that his girlfriend Clementine, played by Kate Winslet, has undergone a procedure to erase him from her memories. So he decides to undergo the same procedure. On the other end of the spectrum is anterograde amnesia, which is the inability to form new memories. In another classic, Memento, which was Christopher Nolan's second movie, it follows Leonard Shelby, who is played by Guy Pearce. Leonard cannot form new memories and is trying to discover the perpetrator who killed his wife. He uses a combination of Polaroids, handwritten notes, and tattoos to try to piece together the puzzle. Now that we've explored memory systems and why they sometimes fail, let's put theory into practice with a few memory experiments. First up, memorizing a list. You're going to see 15 words, one at a time, displayed for 3 seconds each. You'll then be given a 60-minute time delay, and you'll be instructed to write down as many words as you can remember. Do you have something to write them down? Okay, ready. Let's begin. Okay, write down as many words as you can remember. Here's the list of words in totality. How many words did you remember? Did you get all 15? Don't worry if you didn't, because most people don't. It's totally normal. But let's analyze a bit what happened. Here I've broken the words up into 3 groups. How many words in each group did you remember? If you remembered more of the words in group 1, you're seeing the primacy effect in action. This is because information at the start of an activity is often easier to encode and store in long-term memory. What about the words from the end of the list? This is the recency effect in action. More recent information tends to stay in short-term memory. What about those middle words? Did you struggle a bit more with those? This is again common. These words often fall into a memory gap. Now, how about the word vomit? Was that on your list? Vomit is often remembered because it's a word that stands out. It's different from the rest of the words, and it carries a strong emotional and sensory impact. This is an example of the conspicuity effect, where striking or unusual details are more likely to be remembered. Now let me ask, did you write down the word sleep? Let's take a second to check. Sleep wasn't on this list, but many of the words were related to sleep, like bed, nap, and pillow. This demonstrates semantic priming. In semantic priming, related concepts activate schemas in your memory, leading you to misremember details. Finally, did the 60-second distractor video make it harder to recall the words? This is an example of cognitive load, when distractions or multitasking interfere with your ability to retrieve information. Let's reflect. Which memory effects did you experience during the activity? How can understanding these effects help you in real-life situations? Take a moment to think about it. For example, knowing about the primacy and recency effects might inspire you to focus more on the beginning or end of a presentation that you give in class. Let's try another one. What if you wanted to be able to remember a list of items that you don't usually think about? Let's choose something that most of us aren't super familiar with unless you're a poli-sci major. The first 6 vice presidents of the United States. What if I told you that there's a technique that can make memory not just effective, but almost effortless? Enter the method of loci, an ancient memory strategy that uses spatial relationships to help you to remember. The method of loci is simple. You associate items you want to remember with specific locations in a familiar space, like creating a mental journey where each stop triggers a memory. For my CU Boulder students, imagine that you're walking from Norland Library to the UMC. Hopefully familiar with this path. You pass a few familiar landmarks. Now, as we try to remember the first 6 presidents of the United States, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Aaron Burr, George Clinton, Elbridge Gerry, and Daniel Tompkins, you can create vivid mental images at each location to help you to recall them. So let's build this memory journey together. I'll show you a photo that shows a particular part of the route from Norland Library to the UMC. Then we'll come up with a way to remember each vice president at that location. Let's start at the library. You can think about this in any way that will be memorable for you. I tend to think about libraries as academic. Academics and atoms kind of sound similar, so academic atoms. At the library, libraries are academic, John Adams. Next, we have this part of the quad. I need to remember Jefferson. Maybe I'll remember that Jefferson had plantations, and this is an open grassy area, which looks kind of like a plantation, so that links Jefferson to this location. Grass, plantations, Jefferson. Okay, this step is one where we have to remember Aaron Burr. Well, I can think about how burrs are thorns, and maybe my bicycle has a flat tire because it has a burr in it. So bicycles, burrs, Aaron Burr. There we go. This path has 2 trees at the end. Then I could probably think about how President Bill Clinton, which is also a Clinton, though not the same as George Clinton, was a president in between 2 Bushes, George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr. So in this picture, we're going through 2 trees, which is like 2 bushes. Clinton was between 2 bushes, so Clinton and this area. It doesn't have to make a lot of sense. Next, we have this statue. This statue is maybe scary, and scary sounds like Gary, so Elbridge Gerry, scary, scary Gary, Gary. There we go. And finally, the UMC doors. I think Tompkins sounds a little bit like pumpkins, and the flagstone in this building is orange like a pumpkin, so orange, pumpkins, Tompkins. So by attaching each name to a vivid, memorable scene in a familiar location, you create mental hooks that make retrieval easier. So let's review this without the presidents and see what we remember. Libraries, academic, Adams, John Adams. Quad is a field like a plantation, which is Thomas Jefferson. There's bikes. Those bikes might have flat tires caused by burrs, Aaron Burr. 2 trees at the end, like 2 bushes. Clinton was president between 2 bushes, George Clinton. That statue is scary, like Gary, scary Gary, Gary. Flagstaff, orange, pumpkins, Tompkins. See, it works. So why is this technique so effective? It engages multiple systems by combining spatial memory with vivid imagery. And the method of loci then taps into both visual and semantic encoding. We use familiar contexts. Familiar places act as strong retrieval cues, making it easier to access stored information. We also capitalize on novelty. Unique or surprising associations are more likely to stick in our memories. And you can use the method of loci for almost anything. Studying for exams, giving speeches without notes, memorizing grocery lists or to-do lists. There's many different applications. It's a powerful tool that transforms abstract information into something tangible and easy to recall. Now that you've learned how to boost your memory using spatial associations, let's bring everything together with our final reflection and review. Today, we journeyed through the fascinating world of memory, exploring how we process, store, and retrieve information. We talked about recognition versus recall. Recognition is about identifying information when you see it, while recall involves retrieving information without cues. Both can fail us, as showed in the case of David Ranta and the penny experiment. Memory is fallible. As we learned, memory is reconstructive and malleable, demonstrated by studies like Wade et al. In 2002 and Loftus and Palmer in 1974. We need to be cautious of influence and suggestions when we think about our memories. Memory processes include attention, encoding, storage, and retrieval, and these are the foundations of remembering things. Effective encoding techniques, like semantic associations, chunking, make memories stronger. Our memory systems include the different ways that we store memories. Sensory memory captures fleeting moments, short-term memory processes immediate information, and long-term memory provides enduring storage. Each system works together, but forgetting and amnesia can disrupt these connections. Then we did some activities to show memory in action. I showed you different effects that can occur when you're trying to memorize a list, and then we did a method of loci activity, where we learned how to put items together based off of familiar locations and transform abstract information into vivid, memorable scenes. Let's do some review before we wrap up. Which of the following best describes the primacy effect? A. Information presented at the end of a list is more easily remembered. B. Information presented at the middle of a list is forgotten. C. Information presented at the beginning of a list is more easily remembered. Or D. Information unrelated to the list is remembered better than the list itself. The correct answer here is C. Information at the beginning of a list is often remembered better thanks to the primacy effect. Which of the following is an example of sensory memory? Recalling the name of your kindergarten teacher, visualizing the layout of your room while you're at work, memorizing a phone number by repeating it aloud, or briefly registering the image of a lightning flash after it disappears. Correct answer is D. Sensory memory is the brief storage of sensory information, but it disappears almost immediately if it isn't transferred to short-term memory. Before we close, I'd like you to consider this. How has today's lecture changed the way you think about memory? Do you see your memory as a tool that you can refine and strengthen? Are you more aware of its limitations and the ways it can mislead you? Memory isn't just a function of the mind, it's a cornerstone of how we experience life. By understanding its strengths and weaknesses, we can better navigate our world. In our next module, we'll be talking about a different model, behaviorism, which understands humanity through our behaviors, not necessarily our thoughts in our head. Now, as always, thanks for joining me on this exploration of the mind. Stay curious, stay resilient, and above all, live life in flux. Flux out. See you in the next lecture.